What is up, everybody? Welcome to another edition of the Touchline Talk Show. Thank you so much for tuning in. Before I jump in, as always, be sure to hit that subscribe button so you don't miss any of the content I put out every single week on YouTube. Plenty to get into today. Obviously, Bundesliga Premier League season's coming to an end this weekend. I'm going to talk about that. Going to do a check-in on Major League Soccer. Haven't covered that on this show in a little while. But before that, I haven't gotten an opportunity to talk about what is the biggest story probably in this sport right now. It happened over the weekend. I knew it was going to take a little while to sort of let everything play out, and there were other things I wanted to cover on the weekend look ahead, so I just decided I was going to save it for this show on Wednesday when I had more time to talk about it and more information, and kind of we were able to see how this developed. And I'm really glad I did wait. Not that there's anything wrong with an immediate reaction, but now I get to respond to everything that has happened, not just saying the obvious stuff at the beginning, like players shouldn't be subject to racial abuse while playing a sport. And the first thing I want to lay out very clearly here is if you want to say Vinicius gets too emotional at times, lets his emotions get the best of him, doesn't have as much composure as you would like for a superstar, that is fine. There's probably some truth to that. However, that is not a conclusion you get to draw based on somebody's response to being racially abused, especially if you, like me, are someone who has no personal experience with being racially abused. It is a whole different level. There's a dehumanization factor to it. Vinicius' response, the red card, the fact he sometimes gets into it with fans, all of that is out of bounds for this conversation. None of it is pertinent. It's a separate conversation that can be had, but it's a conversation that can only be had once the racial element is removed. Because we don't know what it looks like without the racial element, because this has been happening all season. And he's obviously tired of it, and he's doing something about it, and good for him. And this is why the way media covers things and the way narratives develop is so important. Because what you saw a bunch of, and even before this game, remember the reporter who asked Jurgen Klopp if somehow Vinicius was inviting this kind of, I don't remember if it was specifically racial abuse, but inviting criticism by the way he behaves. And Klopp was indignant, and rightfully so. What kind of question is that? Why is that even something you're putting forward as a actual thing that needs to be discussed? And then you go look at the headlines around Spain and some of the, even Ancelotti's conversations. There was a reporter asking him about it, I think. This idea that somehow Vinicius is inviting this kind of behavior by the way he is acting. And the media going along with that, the media throwing in, and particularly, I'm just generalizing, saying there are members of the media, and you saw it all over the place in Spain, in particular. Right? That idea didn't come out of thin air. And that is one of the first steps that has to be addressed in a situation like this. Outside of obviously preventing the racism from happening in the first place and preventing players from being racially abused in the first place, is there has to be a collective effort to to say no. There is not going to be this idea that is entertained that somehow Vinicius is at fault for this. And yet, that was part of the conversation. And then Javier Tebas comes in, president of La Liga, and just makes things worse by also victim blaming Vinicius, at least to a certain extent, in his initial response. And then he comes back, and now he's saying he didn't intend to insult Vinicius or whatever phrase he used. It's easy to say that now that the entire world's looking at Spain going, and La Liga going, what are you doing? First impressions matter. They matter a great deal. And I'm sure they matter a great deal to Vinicius. And the message that was sent from La Liga is somewhere between you need to accept some responsibility to this, for this, and there's nothing we can do about it. Which is the next thing I wanted to cover. There are so many layers to this. And so many different angles I want to kind of highlight because it's some of it is soccer specific, some of it is societal, and it all needs to be discussed. It is important to recognize here what La Liga has been saying and what Tebas was trying to say, if you want to give him the benefit of the doubt, and that he just worded really poorly, if you want to kind of go to bat for him. There is only so much La Liga can do in terms of the kind of action that is warranted in a situation like this. That is true. However, there are also plenty of things La Liga can do. One of those things is put pressure on the people who can take the extreme action that many people are calling for and would be completely justified. Look what happened. The competition committee, or whatever it's called, imposed a partial stadium ban. That wasn't La Liga because La Liga can't do that. Can La Liga help that happen? Absolutely. Look what a little bit of pressure did. You can also put some pressure on teams to take responsibility and to not promote ideas such as somehow this is, at least in part, Vinicius' fault. And don't add to the problem, but come out from the beginning and say, we as a league have a racism problem. La Liga chose not to do that either. Another option, be part of the larger solution by working to explain to fans why racial abuse is not just another form of smack talk or taunting or whatever you want to call it. Because that's part of the problem here too, is that at least from everything you're seeing and hearing and reading, it does not seem that there is a general acceptance within the fans of La Liga that this is over the line and that this is different than just saying something to a player, telling them how bad they are, whatever it might be. Two completely different things. And that distinction does not seem to have been drawn the way it needs to be. La Liga could be part of that. And then, as I mentioned before, start really putting pressure on teams. Because still, with this partial stadium ban, you have Valencia coming out saying something to the effect of they're disappointed in the punishment because all of their fans are getting punished for the actions of a few. I'm sorry, a few? What do you mean by a few? And I don't think those were the actual words Valencia said in the statement, but you get the point. That's what they were trying to suggest, is that somehow all of these fans are being punished because of a couple bad eggs. No, no, no. That is not what happened. That's part of the issue here, too, is that there has been this denial kind of every step of the way by people and by organizations who could play a meaningful role in preventing this from happening and from making progress. La Liga falls into that category, Valencia falls into that category. I know a couple of Valencia's players. I saw Yunus Musa put out a statement in support of Vinicius. That's helpful. That's important. Shouldn't go unnoticed. But the way that this has played out, it almost feels like every step has just been forced by the public pressure, which kudos to Vinicius for keeping the pressure up. Kudos to the rest of the world for looking at this going, what is happening here? How are we operating this way in 2023? And so there are some things that have happened. That stadium ban, the partial stadium ban, is a big deal. It's an important step in the right direction. And situations like this generally are tricky because and the other part of this is that, arrests have been made. Bans have been handed out to individuals. And that's the step that can always be taken. Is that if you can identify people, you handle them individually first. The problem with this in particular, though, and I alluded to it earlier, is that this was not a couple fans. And at that point, maybe you can get some individuals, but this is too big to be going after individual people and leave it at that. So what are your next options? As the Spanish Federation, the people who can actually take those next steps. Stadium bans and points deductions. And I don't know what the exact right answer is on how to handle this. Part of me is hesitant to immediately go to a points deduction on the first instance. Because now, that has more impact on the players than anything else, especially with a Valencia team trying to avoid relegation. If it comes to that, though, it comes to that. So we're going to have to see moving forward if stadium bans become the new policy, if this makes a difference. And there's certainly reason to be optimistic, and there's plenty of reason to be pessimistic too. I mean, the Mexican men's national team is still trying to get the chant to go away. Fans just keep doing it. I don't know what happens next here. Something got done, and that is good. That is important. But it feels like it took an awful lot of effort from a lot of people who aren't directly involved in this, or who shouldn't have to be leading this charge in the case of Vinicius, to get this done. And who knows how much of an impact it actually makes moving forward. That's incredibly disappointing. And it's an incredible indictment on La Liga and Spain in general. And it also makes you wonder what would have happened if this wasn't Vinicius. The crown jewel of that league, playing for perhaps the biggest club in the world, playing for who, represents a country in Brazil that is as connected to the sport as just about any country in the world. Right? Vinicius has a massive brand and a massive platform. And to his credit, he is willing to fight. He's using it. Do we even get to this point if it's not Vinicius and we're not talking about one of the most promising, guys in his early 20s in the entire world potentially leaving a league because he's tired of getting racially abused by fans? And he brings it up, and Real Madrid have generally had his back, I would argue, in terms of filing some complaints and trying at least a little bit to help, and he hasn't really gotten anywhere until now, when he just kind of said enough is enough, and this entire force kind of got behind him and said, this is ridiculous. And the final part of this is purely from a kind of cynical economic standpoint, outside of all the morality stuff. This is just bad for La Liga. It's not in La Liga's best. Well, I mean, I guess if you're going to. I would still argue. No, I'm going to stick with my original point. It's not in La Liga's best interest to try and pretend like there's not a racism problem when somebody like Vinicius is highlighting it, and it's occurring at a club like Real Madrid, because, one, you might lose one of your biggest names. Ask La Liga how it's working without Messi and Ronaldo. And two, if this doesn't change, what other promising young player like Vinicius wants to come to this league? Are you going to upset some fans? And again, I'm talking about this purely cynically, not in this is what La Liga should be thinking. Yeah, probably. But the end product is more important. And it's all getting laid out there about how La Liga feels about this and how Spain feels about this. And everybody is watching now. In large part because of Vinicius and his courage. What are you going to do next? What are you going to do the next time this happens? What if it happens to a player who's not Vinicius and who doesn't necessarily want to use their platform for whatever reason to go to war, for lack of a better phrase, against the president of the league? And then there's the other parts of why did it take this long for something to be done? But you can't solve anything until you admit there's a problem. And at least there are some people within the Spanish Federation in particular who are admitting there is a problem. That is somewhere to begin, and they're trying to do something about it. But when it's this many people, right, it's not one or two that you can pick out, identify, and isolate. That's on everybody. And it's not fair to everyone, but that's the price that has to be paid to eradicate this. It's obviously on the fans, and it's on the club for not finding a way to wipe it out. And you gotta get people to, even if you're not going to change everybody's minds, right? You could argue that's not soccer's job, because obviously this is a broader societal systemic issue that has permeated into the sport, but goes well beyond the sport. So maybe you can't change everybody's minds, but you can at least stop this from happening, or put in a really valiant effort to stop this from happening in stadiums, and to come down really hard on whoever it takes when it does. And this is something we haven't seen before, this kind of punishment. Again, it's positive, it's a starting point. It's just unbelievable that we're here talking about this. And I really do encourage you, if you haven't already, go see, I retweeted one of them, go see some of the headlines and the way this was being covered in Spain. because that part of this is incredibly important. How it is framed. This is not an incident involving Vinicius. This is not Vinicius somehow contributing and riling up fans. This is a person being racially abused. Full stop. None of that other stuff can come into the conversation until the racism aspect is dealt with. And we are a long way, unfortunately, from that happening based on the way that these events have unfolded. Good for you, Vinicius. I genuinely hope he stays in La Liga because he is part of, he is foundational to that league at this point. He clearly loves that club. And it would just be a really sad commentary on the entire sport, on society, if Vinicius, this guy, felt that he could no longer play in one of the top leagues in the world because of the way he was treated by fans and the league and the country's refusal to do anything to really stop it. So we'll see. He would certainly be justified in leaving. But you do hope that the fact that something was done, the fact that there have been some arrests made in some of these incidents now, the fact that his team really showed up for him and Real Madrid as an entity showed up for him in the days after this, that reminds him that he is supported, that he is loved. It's just baffling. It's sad. It's embarrassing. So good for you, Vinicius. There's a lot of layers to this, and because it's much more complex, even just from this incident, than just saying, "Wow, that is horrible. He was treated that way," and that there wasn't immediate action that was taken. Because it's also about the way it has been framed and the pushback that has had to come against the Spanish media, against La Liga, to even get it to this point, when it should be obvious to everyone that this is simply not okay. But at least that work is being done. Those voices are out there, led by Vinicius. And hopefully this is the beginning of a turning point in Spain and La Liga, because it should be a destination league. It should be a league where players of Vinicius' quality want to play and where they feel not just supported, but feel like the big deal that they are in this sport. He's a superstar, playing for one of the biggest clubs in the world. If that guy isn't immune to this, then who is? And also, maybe it takes, as unfortunate as it is, maybe it takes that kind of player with that kind of platform showing the courage Vinicius had to continue to highlight this, to continue to bring it into a conversation, to continue to hold people accountable. Maybe that is what it takes. At this point, that's all we can hope for, is that this is a turning point and Vinicius is able to add to his already incredible legacy as one of kind of the people who really helped turn the tide when it came to racism in La Liga. So, bravo, Vinicius. This is something you should have never had to deal with, obviously. But you just got to applaud him for the way he is going about it and trying to use his leverage and his influence as a global superstar to make a difference in the world. That's all I've got on that for now. Thanks for hanging in there while I got all of it out. I know there's a lot. Like I said, there's a lot of levels. I wanted to kind of talk about all of them, and we'll see where it goes from here. I'm going to take my first break. When I come back, Major League Soccer check-in. just some quick thoughts about all the teams, how the season's unfolding so far, and kind of what we have learned over the first couple months of the season now that we're getting ready for that summer push and we're starting to get a better idea of what these teams actually look like. You're watching the Touchline Talk Show. Don't go anywhere. And welcome back to the Touchline Talk Show. Thanks so much for tuning in. As always, be sure to hit that subscribe button so you don't miss any of the content I put out every single week. This segment here, I just want to do a check-in and give some thoughts on MLS with everything going on in Europe. Haven't been able to talk about the league too much on this show in the last few months. So that is what I'm going to do here before we get into European finals, Champions League, Europa League, Conference League, end of the season, all of that kind of stuff. I thought this was a good opportunity, so here we go. You are looking at the current playoff teams in the Eastern Conference. My goal is to pretty much touch on everybody here, and just kind of go through some rapid fire thoughts on what we've seen so far. Starting at the top of Cincinnati. Best team in the league so far. Perfect at home. Not so great on the road. 1 win, 1 loss, 3 draws. Not terrible. It does if this trend continues, it does set up for a really interesting conversation in the postseason, though. Because, well, 2 parts. One, if they continue to drop points on the road. Now, again, they've only lost once, but they have dropped points in 4 of their 5 road games. Is it enough to win the Shield? And the second part of that is, if it is enough to win the Shield, you're going through what I would argue, if this comes to fruition, will be the most difficult environment to play in the league to win MLS Cup. Because if they win the Supporters' Shield, they will do it on the strength of what they're doing at home. And again, they haven't dropped points. Not only have they not lost, they've been perfect. Will they drop points at some point? Yeah, probably. But it is certainly not out of the question they go undefeated at home. And then you get into this conversation that you've had with the Union a couple times with LAFC, where you don't want to go there. You don't want to have to get into that stadium and that to be the pathway to MLS Cup. Cincinnati is that team right now. And the other part of this is their defense is much, much better, which was expected because it got better once Matt Miazga came last summer, and it's just continued. It's not spectacular, and it doesn't need to be. It is more than good enough to win an MLS Cup with what they have offensively. And they also have this Brenner deal that maybe they can go get another option in attack to replace him, which is a scary thought considering how good they already are. It wasn't particularly inspiring at times against Columbus over the weekend. They looked brilliant at the beginning, and then they let Columbus back into the game. The third goal was a gift, but they found a way. And they've clearly been the best team in the league so far. So the question will be, I was told coming into the season, there's a reason a lot of people had them as one of the top 2 teams in the East. People had them winning the Supporters' Shield. They're validating all of that. The question will be, can they keep this up? And if they can, is it enough to get the Shield? Or at least to win the East so that you get into MLS Cup having to just win home games, because good luck trying to beat them in that stadium. Second right now is Nashville, and then right behind them, the New England Revolution. I'm going to kind of put these two teams together because to me, the story is kind of similar. They have bounced back from very odd seasons. You had Nashville with the stadium opening and the weird schedule, and you had New England, moving out designated players, coming off of that terrific Supporters Shield season, changing goalkeepers. It was just a strange season. New England was just not as bad as their record last season. And I would argue Nashville weren't either. And so now Nashville have gone back to being defensively elite. Hani Mukhtar is as good as any player in this league. And so you have the Nashville that is just consistently in the top, 5 or so in whatever conference they happen to be in. The Revs are interesting because there's part of me that really wants to buy this and go, it's easy to forget how many pieces they have remaining from a team that won the Supporters' Shield in historic fashion. And Jordy Pekovic might be better than Matt Turner. At least you still have one of the top 2 goalies in the league at the minimum. And also you wonder if this group of players can go replicate what that team did. Because sometimes they leave your head scratching a little bit defensively. Not that they're a bad defensive team by any means. But if Carles Hill isn't operating at MVP level, and if you don't have Adam Buska to consistently score goals, there are some differences between this team and the team of 2 seasons ago. It's still Bruce Arena. They're still very good. He doesn't get enough credit for getting the most out of this group of players, specifically defensively and in the midfield. But I do see them slipping a little bit. To me, they're more like the 5th or 6th best team in the East. But they're off to a good start, and I do throw them kind of in the same category with Nashville. If you want no part of them, and don't put stock into last season. There were weird things going on. This is much closer to who they really are. Behind them is Atlanta. Atlanta has the best attack in terms of goals scored in the league. Atlanta also really struggling defensively. This is kind of what Cincinnati were last season. It's enough to get you into that 4-5 conversation. It very well may be enough to host a playoff game. It is not enough to be an MLS Cup contender unless they can figure this thing out defensively. The attacking pieces have been brilliant. Almada, probably the best player in the league, probably your favorite for MVP. Giakoumakis is scoring goals. They are way better than they were last season. The question is, can they clean things up defensively? Because you can only get so far with the formula they have used to this point. It's still an incredible improvement. You got to give them credit. The fact that they are in this conversation of can they actually be an MLS Cup contender is a credit to how far they've come. They're just not there yet. Right next to them, Philadelphia Union. It's starting to come together. I refuse to lose faith in this team and to lose faith in Jim Curtin. The weird thing is they have not been particularly great at home, which is how they have been so successful these past few seasons. And those early stumbles might cost them a chance to contend for a Supporters' Shield. They're going to have to go on a run. If they're going to give Cincinnati a real challenge. I'm not sure they can go that far. It's not out of the realm of possibility, though. And the other thing is that they've had some dominant wins at home, but they haven't made it look as easy as they did last year, where they were just blowing people out 5-0, it seemed like, every time they played at home. The pieces are the same, it just hasn't looked quite the same. They might be the team, though, that They don't end up as, a top 2 seed, but they're that team you don't want to play in the playoffs because it's all clicking at the right time. Because you know what they can do. They just haven't completely shown it, but they are getting closer. They don't have Open Cup to worry about. They don't have CONCACAF Champions League to worry about. It is all about making up this ground in MLS. And, they're hanging in there even though they lost multiple players to that US U20 World Cup team, including, as Jim Curtin calls him, the best passer on the team, Jack McGlynn. They're hanging in there, though. The question is there another level they can reach? Right behind them, DC United. Awfully, awfully impressed with DC and the job Wayne Rooney has done. Wayne Rooney should be getting serious consideration for MLS Coach of the Year. And Christian Benteke is scoring goals. That's terrific. Just think of where this club was and where this club is now. And it's not just that they're getting results, it's that they look really, really good. They are dynamic. It might not be the biggest names in the world outside of Benteke, but they are really, really good. They are slick. They are creative. Awfully impressed. Do they have enough to get to that next level? That's the question. How much can he get out of this team? And since you're seeing what he's doing with this team, how much, can they go get a big summer signing, something like that, to really make this interesting? But to me, they are a playoff team. This is legit, and Wayne Rooney deserves an immense amount of credit. Then you've got Orlando and Charlotte. I'm going to put them together and then talk about Columbus in a minute. To me, they're the teams that have just kind of been better than everybody below them. Although only Montreal has a worse goal difference out of Eastern Conference teams than Charlotte, and Charlotte has the worst defense in the league. So, to a certain extent, there are some major question marks with Charlotte. I do see them as kind of the 9th, 10th best team in the East, sort of where they were last season. You haven't seen a lot of improvement. Now, they have been better on the road, so that's good. And Orlando has been a little bit more impressive. Obviously, one fewer game played, extra point. I feel like these two teams are pretty much where they're going to end up. Orlando is a top 6-7 team in the East. Orlando should be a playoff team. That's pretty much what they have done to this point. And then there's Columbus. I was super high on this team coming into the season. And they're doing that thing again, like they did last season, where you just have no idea how they are where they are. You look at the way they play, the players in the lineup, and here they are in 8th. And it's not exactly the way it played out last season, but the Cincinnati game, perfect example. They just have nothing to offer for 25, 30 minutes. Then all of a sudden they turn it around, they get right back in the game with plenty of time left, and your young goalkeeper makes an awful mistake and you lose 3-2. Wilfried Nancy can talk about performance all he wants, and I'm a big believer in that early in the season. That sometimes the results don't go away, but you gotta get the performances right so that you can eventually it will even out. Except it's just not evening out for this team. And it's too early to conclude that this is going to be another season like last one. But this has got to stop. They are too good to be letting all of these opportunities slip away. And I'm right. The team behind them has a -6 goal differential. Their goal differential is +8. They have the same amount of points. Now Columbus played one fewer games. It defies logic. That is the theme with this team right now. I am super high on this roster. I am super high on Wilfried Nancy. I'm not giving up on it yet. But it's got to start coming together in terms of results. And it's just not yet. Then going down the table, these are your teams currently not in the playoffs. These 6 teams have 3 combined road wins, and none of these teams have more than 1 road win. If you want to know why they are here and the other teams are above them, that's your first clue. I was concerned about NYCFC coming into the season. I still feel the same way. They lost an awful lot, and they just don't scare you the way that they have in past seasons. All the Red Bulls need to do is start scoring goals. Defensively, they've been really good. It's been a mess, obviously, with the managerial change with Van Zier. And a lot of this has to do with injuries, as I talked about when George Stuber got let go. And specifically injuries in attack. So there's plenty of reason to believe they're going to start scoring more goals. And when they do, they will move up this table because they are a top 9 team in the East, 100%. And they made them, the other point I made that I'll reiterate here, they made that move early enough that they can salvage this very easily. It's not a train wreck yet. It's just a slow start, but there are foundational pieces to build on here once they get healthy, once they kind of figure out what they're going to be for the rest of the season. Inter Miami, all over the place again. It's similar to Columbus. It's just becoming a thing. Winning streaks, losing streaks, no consistency. They can trick you into believing at times that they're really, really dangerous and really good, and then other times they look like the worst team in the league. It's never just average results. It's always significant highs followed by major lows. And then you just go back and kind of fluctuate between the two. And that's what you've seen so far this season. Montreal, again, struggles away from home, conceding too many goals. Now, the talent just isn't there. It's that simple. With what they lost last season and with losing Wilfried Nancy on top of that, they're just not, talent-wise, they're not a playoff team. They will have to overachieve if they're going to finish higher than where they are right now. Chicago, too many draws at home, not enough out of your designated players. Again, rostered's not particularly inspiring. It's not shocking to see them here either. And then there's Toronto. I have been preaching since the first game of this season that if they can't figure this out defensively, they are not MLS Cup contenders. I still firmly believe that. It's the same questions I have about Atlanta. You simply cannot win MLS Cup being that bad defensively. That being said, the bigger issue right now is the fact that this team is scoring less than 1 goal a game with Lorenzo Insigne and Federico Bernardeschi in the lineup, and Mark Anthony Kaye, and Jonathan Osorio, and Michael Bradley. And you can go down the list. How is that possible? Oh, and this team is managed by Bob Bradley, by the way, which I have my questions about Bob Bradley in terms of being able to build a team that wins, that plays the way he wants to and wins in a MLS Cup. I've talked about the changes Steve Schwindel has made and the difference that has made for LAFC in terms of winning trophies. But Bob Bradley's team scored goals. And this team isn't. And now you also have these reports that, Insigne doesn't want to play for him. Bernardeschi's coming out here saying we need a plan, which also makes me scratch my head because when does Bob Bradley knows exactly what he wants his team to look like. The fact that Bernardeschi is saying that is a major red flag. And so the bottom line here is this team is too good and this is spending too much money to let another season go to waste. If they can't figure this out, you got to go change managers. Not only is it the easiest solution, also you've invested in your Italian DPs. They're not going anywhere, nor should they. You got to build this around them. Once you make that decision, that's where you're going. And if Insigne doesn't want to play for Bob Bradley and Bob Bradley can't figure out how to work together and change his mind on that and can't communicate clearly for whatever reason, what he wants this team to do, you got to make that change before it's too late. Because this has been a train wreck. And I really thought it was going to work better. And it became I jumped off that pretty quickly. Because it just became clear they had the same problems that last season's team had. And that they haven't figured this out yet. And they are running out of time. Moving over to the West. Here are your playoff teams in the Western Conference right now. LAFC, no surprise, up at the top. They haven't been, steamrolling people, racking up points relative to what they might be able to do. But they've only lost once, and they've navigated to the CONCACAF Champions League final. They're doing just fine. Bouanga has become the player that I wasn't entirely convinced they had at the beginning of the season. Of course, you could talk yourself into all of these guys becoming that star. But they lost a guy who scored a goal basically every other game. And Bouanga said, that's me now. He's been terrific. They're deep. You add Aaron Long to the back line. They're just... I still think last year's team was better game to game. That's the part I haven't been convinced by yet. But the winning trophies thing, they have figured out how to navigate knockout tournaments. And that is a scary thought because they're always going to have the talent. So maybe it ends in a supporter shield, maybe it doesn't. But they're doing the important thing, which is keeping themselves in position to be set up well heading into MLS Cup, even with everything else that they've had going on so far this season. Then you got the Sounders. Kind of hit or miss, dealing with some injuries. Only one win in their last 5 games. Jordan Morris was really hot, and then he wasn't. I do think they figure this out eventually. Considering what they've kind of worked themselves back from before, this is nothing. I mean, they're, second in the West. It just hasn't kind of all clicked into gear yet. And it's fair to wonder exactly what the ceiling of this team is. Obviously, they can win MLS Cup, but are they on LAFC's level game to game? Are they on Cincinnati's level? Maybe another team emerges in there, whether that's, New England, Philly, Nashville. Because that's the one thing the Sounders haven't done consistently is show up for, 34 games. It's a good start. There are still some questions. They certainly haven't reached the levels that they want to and have been struggling a little bit lately. Also struggling lately, St. Louis. Although it is worth pointing out they have the same goal difference as LAFC. And this is happening without João Klaus, who is very clearly a very important part of that team. And it also then presents a reason why this is happening that makes you not want to panic about this team. And to believe that they really are one of the 4 best teams in the West. When healthy. They just haven't been healthy recently. And they were always going to take a little bit of a step back from what they were doing at the beginning of the season because it was incredible. But I believe this team is legit. I'm not worried about this stretch. I will get concerned if it doesn't pick up when Klaus comes back. But they seem to have hit on their DPs. And Roman Berkey has also come up with some really big moments. That was a question I had. So far, he's proven me wrong. You hit on your DPs in a kind of jumbled conference that a lot of teams have question marks and there aren't a bunch of teams that terrify you, you're in business with a top 4 seed. And that's where St. Louis find themselves right now. Behind them, FC Dallas, just kind of doing what they're supposed to, carrying over from last season. It's a really good roster. They beat most of the teams they should. Don't necessarily have a lot of success against the teams that are better than them. And so that gets you, 3rd, 4th, 5th in the West, probably a home playoff game. and then you got to hope to pull off the upset and see if you can make a run. That's where they are. Although you'll give them credit for last season, they really took a step forward, and they have continued it this season. They have been consistent. Do they have another gear? Because I kind of just feel like they are who they are, and that's a very good team. San Jose. Again, one of your early Manager of the Year candidates. The Earthquakes are in business if they can start performing on the road. They have, so far, been excellent at home, and that's the foundation. If they can just be a little bit better on the road, they are in business. And again, you're looking up and there just aren't that many teams that scare you. They could absolutely finish 5th. Now, you got to keep delivering at home the way that they have been. But to me, this is the surprise improved team that is really that good. That there is nothing fluky about this. Maybe they're not 5th, but I expect them to make the playoffs, and I certainly would not be surprised if they end up kind of where they are right now. Then you got Minnesota United. Just strange. They're winning all these games on the road, not particularly great at home. Now Emmanuel Reynoso is back. They did a great job navigating without him, and I will continue to hold my stance that they're a playoff team without him, a playoff hopeful, and a team that can win the West with him. And they've kept themselves within striking distance, put yourself in position to go get a home game, all that stuff. Now we'll see what it looks like when he gets himself reintegrated. Very weird, messy situation, but it seems to have been resolved. And they got off to a good start, and now you get one of the more dynamic players in the league to provide you even a further boost. Then Vancouver. Step 1 for Vancouver was achieved, and that is simply avoiding the terrible starts they've had these past couple seasons. Because I think if I remember correctly, they've done this twice in a row now, where they make this run at the end of the season, and you go, well, maybe they figured something out. And then they have to go do it again the next season. This time, they are actually, hanging around in a playoff position. So now if they can build on that, they're really onto something. Or if they can just keep doing what they're doing, they're going to make the playoffs. They've just given themselves too much work to do to really give them a chance to make some noise in the postseason. The fact that they're picking up points and just hanging around gives them an opportunity to change that this season. Now, is the terrible stretch coming at the second half of the season? We'll have to see. But so far, so good. That roster is, I feel like, better than people give it credit for, just because it's not necessarily a team you're paying all that much attention to, and they play on the West Coast, right? They're not LAFC. They're not getting a bunch of high-profile games. But it's a good roster, and you're seeing that so far. Then you got the Timbers. Just go look at the... Oh, I apologize. That should be goals allowed, not goal difference. Sorry. Just go look at the goals allowed. There's not much else to it. They're scoring enough. I mean, they're not scoring an incredible amount of goals, but Evander's chipping in with some. They don't have a big-time number 9. And defensively, same issues as last year. They still haven't figured it out. You're not getting much higher than 7, 8, 9 until that happens. And then Austin, this is really simple. Without MVP level Sebastian Giroussi, they're fine. Playoff hopeful. Not one of the best teams in the West. He wasn't particularly great at the start of the season, which that happens. Then he gets hurt, and they're hanging around. That's the first part of this. Now you got to hope that he clicks back into form and gets really hot when he does come back and kind of carries you up the table the rest of the season. And then your final teams, again, I apologize. This should be goals allowed, not goal difference there on the right side. Houston, also impressed with the Dynamo so far. They are following the formula to make the playoffs. Take care of business at home, pick up some points here, there on the road. If they keep this up, they will make the playoffs. Do I think they will win a game in the postseason? No. But getting back to the playoffs is progress, and that is what you have seen so far. Then you got Real Salt Lake and Colorado. They just haven't particularly done anything well. They're not scoring goals. They're conceding a lot. And then the Rapids are the only team in MLS without a home win. That's a problem. So, RSL have been a playoff team recently. This might just be the season where enough things don't go their way. It's still early. I have higher hopes from them than Colorado. I will say that much. Then, the other final two teams here. Kansas City. We're on the verge of this falling apart. Had this really difficult stretch, and they came through it well. They picked up some points, got some wins. Now they are in a much better spot. It's still not great, but this is manageable. If they can build on what they just did, they can get themselves back into the playoff conversation. There's plenty of time left. What they had to do was make sure that they didn't kind of excuse themselves from the conversation too early, and they managed to do it. I'm still really high on this roster if it ever kind of comes together. Because the other point I made recently was it's not like all the guys are injured. They're starting to play in these games, and they still weren't getting the results. Now the results are starting to get to come. You got to make up for the really bad start to the season. I'll still say they make the playoffs. I'm not going to back down from my belief in this roster. I feel much better about that, saying that now, though, than I did 3-4 weeks ago. And then there's the Galaxy. Worst defense in the West. And 1 goal in 7 road games. I believe it is 6 consecutive shutouts on the road. Yes, they did beat LAFC and the team that was thrown out onto the field by Steve Cherundolo last night in the Open Cup. Congratulations. Huge confidence boost. Ricky Puig was amazing. Terrific win against, the LAFC backups. You got to build on that. And this is also the very end. I'll throw this out here real quick. The interesting conversation about somebody like Ezra Hendrickson getting fired is a lot of this just comes down to whether the people in charge want to keep a coach or don't. Because you look at what Ezra Hendrickson did, and you look at what Greg Vanney has done. And I just find it hard to justify firing Hendrickson before Vanney. But you can make the case that Greg Vanney has built this, as has Peter Vermeesen, to a certain extent, Josh Wolf and Bob Bradley, right? They've had time to build this reputation, this pedigree, this goodwill. I'm not saying they should all be fired. I'm just making the point that if this was another coach, he probably would have been gone a long time ago. But this is a super expensive roster, and it's not just one problem either. Like I said, they're conceding way too many goals, and they can't score away from home. It's kind of the same problem Toronto are having. These two teams are in very similar positions, right? High-profile managers, big names, and there's no one thing to point to because they're not good enough defensively and they're not good enough in attack. And you just feel like the whole vibe is bad. And can either of these teams, the Galaxy can more than Toronto, but can either of these teams afford to have an awful season? Or is one of them going to pull the trigger and say, we got to try and do something to change this? I just, just the idea that the Galaxy and Toronto are at the bottom, not just struggling, but at the bottom of their conferences in crisis is what makes this league so fascinating. and so entertaining is because you just never know. You can have all the big names in the world, and you can look up, and it's, you know, your Cincinnati's, who obviously have great players, but not the names. You know, your Nashville's, your New England's, your St. Louis FC expansion team, your FC Dallas, San Jose are up there near the top of the conferences, and your Galaxy and Toronto are right there at the bottom. So that is the MLS check-in. Going to take one more final quick break here, and then a special edition of the weekend look ahead. All things Premier League and Bundesliga, setting the stage for the final weekend of the season. You're watching the Touchline Talk Show. Don't go anywhere. And welcome back one more time to the Touchline Talk Show. I will mention it one more time. Be sure to hit that subscribe button so you don't miss any of the content I put out on YouTube. Special edition of the weekend look ahead here, focused exclusively on the two primary, top 5 European leagues that are ending their seasons this weekend. Premier League, Bundesliga. What is at stake? What games do you need to be paying attention to? What do certain teams need to achieve or avoid certain situations from happening? Starting in the Premier League. All these games on Sunday. The ones that have ramifications. Fulham at Manchester United. Now, I should also qualify this by saying this could change a little bit based on the United game on Thursday that has not happened. But as of now, games with implications. Fulham at Manchester United, Liverpool at Southampton, Brighton at Aston Villa, Bournemouth at Everton, Tottenham at Leeds, West Ham at Leicester. United need one more point to clinch the top 4 Champions League spot. They could get that against Fulham. They could get that against Chelsea. They could get that against Fulham. So at that point, Liverpool's game against Southampton doesn't carry a lot of weight. However, if United lose both of these games and Liverpool beat Southampton, Liverpool is going to win on goal difference. So if they can finish tied, they will finish in the Champions League spot. They will get that top 4 spot. It's just incredibly unlikely. They really needed to avoid dropping points over the weekend. They couldn't do it. And so United have 2 opportunities here to make sure that they finish in that Champions League spot. So if you're Liverpool, you're hoping for a miracle. Then, Europa Conference League. Aston Villa, currently in 7th, 1 point ahead of Spurs. These teams are tied on goal difference. So what that means is, if Villa match Spurs' result, they get the Conference League spot. If they both lose, matching result, including both losing, right? If Spurs win and Villa draw or lose, Spurs get the spot. Again, Villa hosting Brighton, who just clinched a Europa League spot, Tottenham going to Leeds. Or if Spurs draw and Villa lose, Spurs will, because they're tied on goal difference now, pass Villa on goal difference and get 7th place that way. So it's basically a who gets the better result situation. If Villa can match it, they're going to Europe. For top 7 finish, Europa Conference League. Then you got relegation. This isn't super complicated. You got 3 teams for 2 spots. And I kind of operate it and think of it in a way that I think is not overly complex. I'll go through all the actual permutations first, and then I'll kind of explain what I mean. Everton win, and they're safe. Leicester win, and Everton draw or loss because of their goal difference. They're safe. Leeds need a win of Leicester to drop points and Everton to drop points to have a chance. Now, this also gets complicated because Leeds are 2 points back of Everton and -3 in the goal difference battle there. So hypothetically, if Leeds win and Everton draw, Leeds could win by enough. Again, this is unlikely but possible that they pass Everton even if Everton draw. But the simple way to think about it is this. Everton win, they're staying up, the other two teams go down. Leicester win, Everton don't win, Leicester stay up, the other two teams go down. Leeds win, Everton lose, Leicester don't win, Leeds stay up. So Leeds need all kinds of help. Everton are in control, and Leicester aren't in a terrible spot. They just need one thing to go their way. If Everton don't win and Leicester if Everton don't win and Leicester do win, Leicester stay up. If Leicester don't win, it doesn't matter, they're getting relegated. And then you're hoping, if you're Leeds, that Everton lose and you win, and then Leeds stay up. So there is a path for all three teams. I just expect this to come down to Leicester and Everton. But who knows? So that's the situation there. And then in the Bundesliga, your games with ramifications. Bayern at Köln. These games are on Saturday, so the Bundesliga will end one day before the Premier League. Bayern at Köln, Mainz at Dortmund, Werder Bremen at Union Berlin, Freiburg at Eintracht Frankfurt, Augsburg at Borussia Mönchengladbach, Schalke at Red Bull Leipzig, Hoffenheim at Stuttgart, Leverkusen at VfL Bochum. Now, pretty much everything is in play still here. Dortmund match Bayern's result, champions. Right? They got the 1 point edge right now, but they're not winning on goal difference. So a Dortmund loss and a Bayern draw does not help them very much. They've got to just keep that 1 point advantage. So a win gets the job done. That's really the focus here. You can't be hoping that, because if they draw, and then you got to hope Bayern draws, and Dortmund are in control. They just need to match Bayern. That's where that's at. Then top 4 race. Leipzig are in at 3, so it's coming down to Union Berlin and Freiburg. They're tied on points. Union Berlin are currently 4 ahead on goal difference. So again, hypothetically, Freiburg could go win 6-0 and pass Union Berlin on goal difference. Is that going to happen? Probably not. So if you're Freiburg, you are hoping that you need to better Union Berlin's result. If you're Union Berlin, you feel pretty good as long as you match Freiburg's that you will be going to the Champions League next season. Then you got the relegation battle. There are all kinds of teams still involved. I am not going through all the permutations because it's way more complicated than the Premier League. The one game I want to highlight, though, is Hoffenheim-Stuttgart. Because this one is pretty simple. Stuttgart, win, stay up. Hoffenheim, avoid losing, they stay up. So somebody is going to come out of this game having avoided relegation. And somebody is probably going to be worried at the end of it. Now, it could be that both teams end up fine. There's just so many games and so many possible outcomes. It's way too complicated to get into. But that is the one game that it is pretty clear. Somebody is going to come away very happy with that result because it will mean that they are safe. And it's entirely possible both teams end up being safe. But that's where we're at. That's as much as I wanted to get into because, quite honestly, I didn't feel like trying to figure out all of the... It's something like 5 or 6... Just go look at the table and see how many teams could still end up somewhere in that relegation conversation is quite something. So, that is all for the weekend look ahead. Enjoy this final match day in the Premier League and the Bundesliga. I will have full reaction to it on the weekend roundup. But that is all for today's show. Thank you so much for tuning in, and I'll see you next time.